Oversimplified. My name is Happy, and I'd like to welcome you to my History Reaction channel. Today, we're going to be taking a look at Part 2 of The Russian Revolution by Oversimplified. As always, a link to the original content will be down in the description below. Please be sure to check out Oversimplified if you like what you see here. If you're not already subscribed, consider subscribing and showing some support to Oversimplified. We really want to encourage Oversimplified to keep making these wonderful introductory videos to history. Alright, with that said, in part 1 I mentioned that I have been to Russia, I have been to Moscow, and in Krasnaya Ploshchad, the Red Square, I did pick up a Matryoshka doll. I love these things, they're just gorgeous. And yes, they do open up, and yes, you do have nesting dolls. I think there's about 8 of them in this one. I'm not going to go through them all. I don't want to bore you guys to death. But I did say I had one. I did say that if I thought of it, I would share it. Well, I've just shared it. Anyway, we're going to pick up where we left off with the Russian Revolution. In the first episode, we got to see some of the things leading up to revolution. We're introduced to the background of the serfs, the working class in Russia when they start finally industrializing. And things like the Russo-Japanese War and the 1904, 1905, and the consequences of that, and other economic interests and problems, which leads to a 1905 revolution. We talked about Bloody Sunday, which was a massacre of a crowd right outside the Winter Palace. The crowd was led by a Father Gapon, a Russian Orthodox priest, who was there to petition the Tsar for redress of their grievances, and we went into a lot of detail on that. Today we're going to be picking up with the outbreak of the February Revolution and then the October Revolution. And the very end of last episode we were introduced to Grigory Rasputin, who will be a fairly important character for the actual outbreak of revolution. I mean, he's just really kind of one of many things on this house of cards that's about to come tumbling down, but he is an important piece. So let's get into this, and let's just see where it goes. Just like last time, I do have some primary sources that I will share once we get to the appropriate points, and we'll just have some fun with this, so let's get into it.
While Nicholas had been busy playing with his new best friend, tensions in Europe had been rising. It just so happened that in 1914, one Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary went for a drive with the top down in Sarajevo. One thing leads to another, and suddenly Russia found itself at war with half of Europe. A wave of patriotism swept through Russia. The capital was renamed to Petrograd because
I did do Oversimplified World War I, so if you want more detail on World War I, you can go check that out either on Oversimplified, or if you want a little more detail, you can check out my reaction, which is like 2 weeks ago, or actually it was last week on this channel, so should be pretty easy to find.
St. Petersburg sounded a bit too German. Even revolutionaries were getting on board.
Yeah, Petrograd, it just comes from Pietro, Peter, and Grad comes from God, city, Peter City, basically.
To them, World War I was a big stinky imperialist war, but they didn't want their big stinky imperialist replaced by a foreign one. So pretty much everyone wanted Russia to win. I hope Russia loses. Jeez, read the room, Lenin. Lenin hoped Russia would lose because that would help him overthrow the Tsar. As long as he did that, who cares if Germany blows up half the country? And blow up half the country, they did.
That's somewhat accurate. Like I said in the last video, one thing that if you want to fault Lenin for anything, it's that he was obsessed with revolution. He wanted this revolution to happen. He really didn't care what needed to happen to make it happen. So yeah, he didn't read the room very well. Or did he? He probably read it too well. He wanted them to lose. Guns, ammo, and everything else we need to fight a war. Fragile, but it's not from Acme. I mean, it's not going to work, obviously.
An inefficient czarist government meant there were shortages of just about everything you need to fight a war. And if losing a teensy-weensy war with Japan upset the people, losing a giant Wyatt war like this was much worse. Soldiers were deserting, the economy was imploding, and in no time, Russia was starving. The peasants were getting more peasanty, the workers were getting more workery, all the while Germany was getting more Germanery. Dmitri, we need to win this war. I need someone with a great military mind to step in and take control. You're right. How about General Hickenlooper? How about me? You can't run the war. Who'll be in charge of the country while you're gone? Obviously, my German wife and a homeless wizard.
Okay, that's bad. And this really does contribute to the revolution. Again, there's so many things going on. This is not what causes it, but it is just one more a stick in the fire, so to speak. He's going to leave behind, in charge of the country, his German wife while they're fighting the Germans, along with a creepy homeless wizard guy that nobody trusts and who is a known womanizer, who he's leaving home alone with his wife. He couldn't have set this up better for a horrible look. And he's already looking horrible, and he's not making a situation any better at all.
Duh. Nicholas declared himself commander-in-chief and went to the front lines, leaving his German wife in charge while they were fighting the Germans. It wasn't a good look. And because Alexander was so close to Rasputin, people believed that he was actually calling the shots and secretly destroying Russia, and maybe even boinking her. An even worser look. At this point, a bunch of nobles just couldn't take it anymore. Rasputin is destroying the country. We have to break his magic spell over the Tsar. But how? He's magic.
That would work.
Very cool. Hey, it's Rasputin. The sexy party is running a little late, but in the meantime, why don't you try one of these totally not poisoned cakes? Dude, why'd you say it like that? He's totally gonna know they're poisoned now. Shut up. I said they're not poisoned. Dude, he just ate so much poison. How is he still alive? It must be the magic. Go with plan B. Is he dead? See, Boris? I told you he was the Antichrist and you didn't believe me. Can you shut up for 1 minute and help me roll him up?
Still isn't dead.
Are you sure he's dead? I don't know, but I'm supposed to be hosting a charity auction right now. Can we get this over with?
I've been to that bridge, too. In fact, the hotel we stayed at, Krasovsky Island, the bridge to that island is the bridge they threw him off of. Yeah. They found water in his lungs, so he apparently drowned. Scary stuff when you really think about it. It does add to his legend and mystique. Now, there's a lot of debate over exactly what happened and how much of this is true. The autopsy report that he had water in his lungs is the only thing I can say for certain happened.
Okay, now he's dead. The murder of Rasputin, just like his life, is shrouded in mystery and speculation. He probably didn't really die like that, but he also probably didn't really heal people. He probably didn't influence the Tsar as much as people thought. He probably wasn't secretly destroying the country. But what he definitely did do, even in his death, was ruin the Tsar's reputation.
Yeah, I mean, that is ultimately what this boils down to. It's just another thing to pound down the Tsar's reputation that's already almost rock bottom.
Russia's autocracy looked more outdated than ever, and the Russian people were taking notice. Come on, men. Remember what we're fighting for. Yeah, no.
I don't have any examples handy with me, but I did a paper several years ago on the February Revolution, and in part of the research for that, I went through some letters from the officers on the front lines like this, and a lot of them were talking about not so much how much they were suffering, but how much they were worried about their families back home who were starving to death. There's several officer letters that express this concern, and journals and diaries, that kind of thing, where they're worried about their family back home starving because there's a food shortage. There is a lot of the working men are out in the field now. The crops are not getting taken care of properly. And there's a lot of fear that their families back home are starving, and they're starting to worry about that extensively.
We're at. World War I left Russia broke, hungry, and exhausted. Yep. And with Nicholas acting as commander-in-chief, he was getting even more blame. For the second time, Russia was on the brink of revolution.
No, not attempt number... Well, yeah, this would be attempt number 2. And number 3.
By 1917, Russia had been fighting a war it couldn't afford for 3 years. They were running out of many things, most worryingly, food. On International Women's Day, 1917, thousands of hungry women in Petrograd were...
Now, they said there... Let's go back to that
real
quick.
On International...
March 8th, 1917. Why is it called the February Revolution? Well, at this time, Russia was still on the old calendar system. I don't remember off the top of my head how many days behind it is, or ahead it is, but it's a little bit ahead of the rest of the world. So for the Russians, this happened in March. For the rest of the world, it happens in February. It would be the Bolsheviks that change this and get the Russian calendar caught up with the rest of the world. So yeah, from the Russian perspective at this time, it was March 8th. For the rest of the world, it was late February.
Women's Day, 1917. Thousands of hungry women in Petrograd were so sick of being hungry that they took to the streets. And it turns out it's not just women who experience hunger, but men too. So the next day they joined in as well. Gatherings on the streets were forbidden, but I'm not sure how you'd arrest 250,000 people. The crowds demanded an end to the war, an end to food rationing, and even an end to the Tsar's autocracy. Now, normally the troops would deal with this kind of thing, but as it turns out, soldiers get hungry too, and they were also tired of having to kill their fellow Russians so much. So entire regiments mutinied in the capital, and they joined the crowd as well, trashing.
And this isn't the first time this has happened recently in terms of Russian history, 1917. Famously, this is happening in Petersburg, but it's also happening in a lot of the little villages that you never hear about prior to this. There's one example I can think of, and I don't remember the name of the village, but I know it was down in the south. It might have even have been in what's now Ukraine or somewhere in that vicinity. What I do remember is that the local village leader had bread riots on his hand, and bread riots being food protests. And he called in Cossacks to fire upon the protesters, and the Cossacks refuse. And they threaten to shoot the village leaders if they don't back down and do what they can to help get these peasants some food. So you see some of these uprisings. This isn't the start of it. This is where it really escalates. This is where it hits the capital. And it's the first major large-scale uprising. But there were pockets of this bread riots going on in other areas, just on a smaller scale and more localized. The folks up in Moscow and Petersburg probably hadn't even heard of some of these yet, because news doesn't spread that fast at this time, especially in a place like Russia. What else would I want to say here? Well, let's just take a look at a couple of my primary sources that I pulled up for this, because here is a diary entry, written by an American visitor to Moscow named Norman Fell. This was written on February 16th of 1917 by an American in Moscow. All sorts of committees have been formed to deal with the bread situation. Will the Russians rise to the opportunity now? Or will they branch off on wild ideals and lose track of their vital objects? Some think they are too impractical to make a success. Others think they will. Personally, they seem so earnest and determined to do well that I think they will. All kinds of rumors. The Tsar is in Petrograd. No, in Pskov. No one knows surely what he is doing. Surrounded by vile advisors, that's kind of that Tsar is good, boyars are bad concept kind of creeping into him. He's probably hearing that from the people around him. Surrounded by vile advisors, he really has no chance. The parallel to the French Revolution has so far been striking. A weak king, not knowing what state his country is in. A revolution brought on primarily by the absence of bread. The weak king dissolved the Duma as Louis tried to do. This precipitates things. So I think that's kind of interesting, because that kind of helps put this in a little bit of perspective from an outsider's point of view. And this is written in Moscow. Remember, this initial uprisings happening around the same time over in Petersburg. In fact, it's a little later. This is written before the actual uprisings, from a place where it's not the epicenter. So if this foreigner can see what's happening, you know it's bad. And I gather from the way he writes it that he's getting a lot of this just from listening around. Interesting stuff. But I thought this would also be fun. This is something that Trotsky writes about this uprising taking place in Petersburg. The women's strike followed the next day by the men's strike. It had not occurred to anyone that it might become the first day of revolution. Not a single organization called for strikes that day. What is more, even a Bolshevik organization, and a most militant one, the Viborg Borough Committee, all workers, actively opposed the strikes. Thus, the fact that the February Revolution was begun, Thus, the fact is that the February Revolution was begun from below, overcoming the resistance of its own revolutionary organizations, the initiative being taken of their own accord by the most oppressed and downtrodden part of the proletariat, the women textile workers, among them no doubt many soldiers' wives. So I've always found that kind of interesting. Now, again, Trotsky's going to be biased, obviously, but I find it interesting that he attributes this not only to a grassroots uprising, basically, from below, the people are rising up, but he says that at least one Bolshevik or a group of Bolsheviks was actively trying to oppose it because basically they weren't ready yet. This is not the revolution that they were trying to plan. Now, they contributed to this by all their pamphlets and their attempts to incite people, but they wanted this to happen on their own terms, their own time. So I've gotten into some arguments with people over the years about this because so many people are absolutely intent on blaming the Bolsheviks for both revolutions. And sure, like I said, the Bolsheviks are agitating. They have been, since at least 1903, when they were first founded, because Lenin's out there either in Siberia or when he's in exile and the rest of around Europe. He is putting up his little pamphlets. He's trying to stir the people up. But as Trotsky points out here, this was not organized. This was not planned. This was a spontaneous uprising from a strike into something much larger. And it had a lot to do with food shortages. That wasn't the only thing contributing, but that was a big part of it.
Symbols of the Tsar and his autocratic regime. Things were escalating very quickly. Liberal politicians watching the riots in the streets had long been dissatisfied with the Tsar, since he would shut their parliament down anytime they did something he didn't like. They believed the only way to bring stability back to the streets was for Nicholas II to abdicate. The riots continued. The police fired on soldiers. Soldiers fired on soldiers. The workers re-established the Petrograd Soviet. Politicians began arresting the Tsar's ministers. He may have been an autocrat, but he just lost complete control of his capital city. Talk about embarrassing. Nicholas, the troops have turned against us. The people have taken over the city. They've even cut my phone line. Hello? Hello? The phones are down. Things must be bad. I'd better go back there. Nicholas hopped on the next train back to Petrograd, but he never made it to the city. His train was met by military generals and other politicians. What's going on? Nicholas, look man, we need to talk. It's not you, it's us. Who am I kidding? No, it's definitely you. During the whole crisis in Petrograd, the liberals convinced the generals that if Nicholas abdicated, the people would calm down, and the generals were on board. They didn't have time to quell the chaos, because don't forget, they were still losing a global...
They were still at war, people were still starving, and it's not just Nicholas they're going to be blaming. They're going to be blaming the boyars, the nobles. They're going to be blaming all the elite. So just one of them stepping down isn't going to be enough. It's going to take more than that.
All-encompassing war against the Germans. And with the military no longer on his side, Nicholas had no choice but to step down. Throughout his entire reign, he had done everything he could to keep all the power for himself. And in the end, that's exactly what left him with none. But then there was a big question. Who would replace Nicholas? Well, his son Alexei was next in line. Hey buddy, Daddy couldn't handle the complex socioeconomic problems of a giant multinational, multi-ethnic empire that's engaged in total war with all of Europe. You think you could give it a shot?
That'd be my reaction too if I were Alexei. Nicholas does have a brother. The brother flat out refuses it too because his brother's not an idiot.
Alexei just wasn't ready to be Tsar. Nicholas did have a brother, but given the state of the empire, he wasn't keen either. And so, 300 years of Romanov rule in Russia just kind of came to an end. The earlier 1905 revolution hadn't changed much, but this new revolution had left Russia without a Tsar. And still, before the year was over, there would be one more revolution left to come.
Yep.
Nicholas's failure as commander of the armed forces was the final straw that broke the camel's back. Do you think maybe you could have done any better? Well,
sure,
guess
why
what?
not?
It's time to find out in Rise of Kingdoms.
All right.
Rise of Kingdoms is...
We will be skipping the ad since this is an older video. I do let them run if it's a relatively new one, but this is too old to worry about. So I'll see you on the other side.
Now, where was I?
All right, here we are.
Oh, yeah. Hungry woman, absolute chaos, and the end of the Tsar.
Yep.
Oh, hey guys, says here there's been a revolution, and the reign of the Tsars has ended. Oh, come on, I missed another one? Why am I even in this video? Well, it's not like you could have done anything. As long as there's a world war, you can't get back to Russia. Who wants to start a revolution? Dang it! Russia was still at war with half of Europe. The Germans, however, had an idea. They thought that if they helped Lenin get back, he would cause trouble for the new Russian government. So they put him on a train, destination.
Which is not a bad idea. And this is going to lead to accusations that Lenin was a German agent. As far as I know, he wasn't. I don't think there's any evidence whatsoever that he was. But he was definitely intentionally sent back, knowing full well that as an obsessive revolutionary, he's going to further destabilize this already destabilized country. Because that's one problem with new government. When you have a brand new government erupting out of this kind of chaos, it's going to be very, very, very vulnerable.
Petrograd. It was a long journey, and while Lenin was cooped up in his train, things in Russia were changing. Workers were taking control of their factories. Soldiers were socking it to their mean old officers. Without a czar, a big old power vacuum had opened up, and someone needed to fill it. The liberals proposed they be in charge, and they set up the Provisional Government. The workers, however, had already begun establishing local Soviets, largely controlled by the social revolutionaries and the Mensheviks.
Yeah, so a Soviet is not an exact parallel, but think of it kind of like a workers' union. A Soviet is going to represent one segment of the workforce.
Since neither felt like they had the power to oust the other, Russia ended up in a classic dual power conundrum. The two coexisted, with the Provisional Government becoming the official government and the elected Soviets issuing orders to the workers and soldiers. This power balance was delicate, and all it would take is one bold revolutionary to come along and give everyone a big-brained beatdown. Oh boy, Lenin's coming home. I can't wait for him to see all the great things we've accomplished, and I'm gonna show him my fan art. Oh look, here he comes now. Shut up, shut up! You all suck! The Provisional Government sucks, the Soviet sucks, even your fan art sucks! Why does he have to be so mean? In case you couldn't tell, Lenin wasn't a fan of everything that had been happening. In his April theses, he called the Provisional Government and the Soviets a bunch of big bourgeois bozos. And he kinda had a point. There was still a lot for the Russian people to be mad about. The Provisional Government hadn't got Russia out of the war, the people were still hungry, and the peasants were still hoping to get more land. Meanwhile, the Soviets hadn't done much to change things either. But even though they weren't perfect, a lot of people did like what the new government had been doing. There was progress. The secret police were disbanded, the death penalty abolished. They even planned to hold elections, meaning for the first time ever, the Russian people could choose their own government. To many, Lenin seemed like some out-of-touch weirdo. If Lenin wanted to go from whiny irrelevant zero to hunky communist hero, he'd need to shake things up a bit. So he and the Bolsheviks came up with a hot new slogan that promised to give
peace, land, and bread. You'll see that slogan still printed on several monuments throughout Russia. When I was in Moscow, there is basically a World Fair pavilion in Kiev. It's hard to say, but it's right across from the Museum of the Cosmonautics. And there is a monument there to the Russian peasants. It's a pretty famous one. You've probably seen pictures of it. It's got the man with the sickle and the woman carrying a sheaf of wheat, and it has written on it, peace, land, and bread. This is a very powerful slogan, because this is the three things that pretty much covers everything that the Russian people are demanding at this time. There's a few other things. The women were wanting equal rights, for example. There was a women's liberation movement going on a little bit. There were other things going on, but these were the big three. The people wanted to get out of the war. The serfs wanted their own land. They wanted to break away from serfdom completely and still be trapped in a virtual serfdom, so to speak. And they were starving. They needed food. They wanted bread.
The people what the Provisional Government wouldn't. Peace. Don't like war? We'll end it. Land. You want land? We'll give it to you. Bread. Hungry? Scooby-Dooby-Doo. Lenin also called for all power to the Soviets, which meant getting rid of the Provisional Government and having the Soviets run the place. A communist dream. The people liked these slogans, and bit by bit, the Bolsheviks became more popular. Some Mensheviks even began switching sides. But even though the people thought Lenin's slogans rocked, as long as the Provisional Government didn't mess up, they'd continue to support it. So let's check in on the Provisional Government. Oh, Provisional Government, you've made a big mess. The Provisional Government lasted for just 9 months, but those 9 months were chaos. The people wanted Russia out of World War I, but Minister of War Alexander Kerensky thought instead of doing that, why not do the exact opposite? If the people saw more Russian victories, they'd have to support the new government. And that one...
Yeah, and that's a gamble. I mean, I get where he's coming from. If we can turn this war around and start winning, then maybe the people will back off. It's a huge gamble. For one thing, the odds of them starting winning at this late stage are pretty slim, and that's assuming the people are going to be happy that they're winning. There's already war weariness. They've already lost insane casualties. So it's a huge gamble, and it's not a good one.
Just about as well as you might expect. These heavy defeats worsened the Russian economy and made the hungry people hungrier. And by now, I think you know what comes next. They trashed the place. More looting, more rioting, more violence. It was like the Tsar had never abdicated. Tens of thousands of armed workers took to the streets during some of the worst violence Petrograd had seen yet. And in response, Kerensky called in the troops, who opened fire on the demonstrators. For now, Lenin and other Bolshevik leaders wanted to distance themselves from the violence, but the crowds marched under Bolshevik slogans, and as a result, Kerensky, now the prime minister, took the opportunity to stamp down on the Bolsheviks. Their leaders were arrested. Lenin was accused of being a German agent, and he was forced to flee to Finland in disguise. This sucks! Now I'll never get to have my revolution. Why are you wearing a dress? It's a disguise, idiot! And it makes me feel pretty. Kerensky had successfully dealt with the violence, but he just couldn't catch a break. This increasing support for more extreme forms of socialism, along with the poor handling of the war, alarmed traditional liberals and bougie business boys. To appease them, Kerensky decided to promote a military legend to Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces. Someone who hated the revolution, loved the death penalty, and was devoutly anti-socialist, General Kornilov. Hey man, thanks for the promotion. That was real swell of you. Of course, with you by my side, who would dare try to overthrow me? How about me?
Kornilov
I did not see this coming. Unfortunately for Kerensky, Kornilov hated the liberal and socialist reforms of the new government, particularly the dumb socialist soldiers' committees. The army was no place for undisciplined left-wing snowflakes. Fearing a Bolshevik takeover was imminent, Kornilov ordered his men towards Petrograd to oust the Soviet and take over. Kerensky freaked out, and he needed help. Since he knew Trotsky was finger-licking good at organizing, he...
Finger-licking good, that's a reference to Colonel Sanders. And yeah, I see that. Trotsky in that picture did look like Colonel Sanders.
And other Bolshevik leaders were released, and they, along with the Soviet, organized the defense of Petrograd. Kornilov had the power of soldiers, but the Soviet had the power of workers. And they did what workers do best. Railroad workers diverted Kornilov's men away. Telegraph workers messed with his communications. They even infiltrated his forces and encouraged the demoralized men to desert. They were also armed en masse, but in the end, no fighting was necessary because
Can you see the problem with this?
Kornilov's coup just fell apart, and Kornilov was sent straight to prison. Everything was coming up Kerensky. Hey, thanks for the help, boys. Couldn't have done it without you. Now that there's no longer any threat, how about you, return all those guns I gave you? No.
Yeah.
Oh, no. In order to kill a rat, Kerensky had just given a gun to a bear. A Bolshevik bear. The whole affair was a huge propaganda win for them. They had defended the revolution, and their popularity skyrocketed. They found themselves elected to the Petrograd and Moscow Soviets, with Trotsky even becoming chairman in Petrograd. They were now in a very powerful position. Almost powerful enough for Lenin to return home from Finland and finally stage his long-awaited communist revolution. The Bolsheviks began planning their takeover of the Russian government. Some got cold feet and began arguing against Lenin's armed revolution in favor of a more peaceful approach. And they even wrote newspaper articles about it, which kind of gave the whole scheme away. The Bolsheviks are planning an armed revolution?
Yep.
I did not see this coming. Kerensky began arresting Bolsheviks, and as a result, Lenin and the boys felt they had no choice but to commence the revolution right now. Lenin was back in Petrograd, but was still in hiding, so Trotsky got the ball rolling, using his position as Soviet chairman to organize the Bolshevik militias. Now, if you were to ask Soviet artists, the revolution went something like this. As much as they would like you to think it was a glorious, violent, heroic takeover, the truth seems to be a little more underwhelming. The Bolsheviks just kind of walked into key buildings in the city and took control. Bolshevik supporting sailors even brought in a huge battleship, but
That battleship was actually the protected cruiser Aurora from the Baltic Fleet. It fires the first shot of the October Revolution, the one that leads to the storming of the Winter Palace. Or at least that's what the traditional story is. The Aurora, if you're not familiar with it, I talk about it a little bit more at the end of Blue Jays, my reaction to Blue Jays' dumbest Russian voyage that nobody talked about. It is a pretty well-known ship. It's still in Petersburg. You can actually visit it. It is a museum ship now. You can go aboard. You can tour it. But yeah, it wasn't a battleship. It was a cruiser. Heavily armed cruiser, but it was a cruiser. Unless there was another ship. But I know the Aurora is the one that figures prominently in this story. They were sent there to prevent provisional government forces from using some of the bridges, and they end up firing a blank to signal the attack on the Winter Palace.
There wasn't really any fighting. Nobody really tried to stop them. In just one day, they took control of the city. Next, Kerensky just managed to escape before the Bolsheviks surrounded the Winter Palace, placing the Provisional Government under siege inside. Is it safe to come out yet? I think so. Fear my revolutionary might. Give me that. That night, Lenin came out of hiding to play a bigger role in the revolution.
That was kind of unfair to Lenin. From everything I've read, he was a fairly modest when it comes to his lifestyle. And if he got more than he needed, he actually tended to donate it to orphanages, to charities, to people who needed it. And that is one positive thing you can say about Lenin. But not all his followers were that way, by no means. But from everything I've read about Lenin, he did do that. Taking candy from a baby, no. Well, unless it furthered the revolution, then he might. He was obsessed with his revolution, no question about that.
With him back at the helm, they had one more job to do: storm the Winter Palace and arrest the Provisional Government. And here comes the final showdown. The palace was defended by a force known as the Battalion of Death, who immediately gave up. And just like that, Lenin had won. As far as violent, bloody revolutionary uprisings go, this wasn't really one of them. But Lenin was finally in charge of Russia. He had spent his whole life dreaming.
What follows is extremely bloody, but yeah, the October Revolution itself, not so much.
Of this moment, he set up the first Council of People's Commissars, his own cabinet with him in charge. This was it, his chance to finally make his communist utopia with equality and freedoms beyond compare. Hey Lenin, before we took power, they were planning on holding elections. Shall we go ahead with those? Of course, you can't have a communist utopia without high levels of political participation. The proletariat should be free to elect. What? The social revolutionaries won. We lost. Those don't count. Lenin claimed the elections were unfair, and the constituent assembly they created was counter-revolutionary. He presented the new assembly with a motion that basically said, sign here and give up your power. And when the assembly was like, no, Lenin said, see, they're disobeying me. Proof they're counter-revolutionary. Shut it down, boys. Moderate socialists and others weren't happy when Lenin had the assembly closed by force, and when campaigners began taking to the streets, they were fired upon. For Lenin, setting up a communist utopia was looking suspiciously like setting up a dictatorship. While he was implementing many of the communist policies you'd expect, he was also refusing to work with other political parties and cracking down on opposition. Hey Lenin, are you setting up a dictatorship? I'll shoot you if you are. Of course not. What a crazy theory. Anyway, I'm pleased to announce I'm setting up a secret police force to repress and kill traitors. And by traitors, I of course mean anyone not loyal to me.
Yeah, he was shot by a woman at one of his rallies.
Owie, 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 owie. The assassination attempt made on Lenin's life in August 1918 failed, but in response, the Bolsheviks ramped up their oppression. But while all of this chaos was erupting back home, Lenin and the boys were also distracted by another problem. They were still at war with the Germans, and they had promised to give the people peace. So Lenin made Trotsky Commissar for Foreign Affairs and sent him off to negotiate a peace deal with the Germans. The Germans offered Trotsky really harsh terms, because they were winning the war. They demanded Russia give up a butt-ton of land, something that would be devastating to the economy. Look, I know it's not great, but I think we have to accept it. Are you insane? This will ruin us. Hey Trotsky, you got a big brain. What do you think? How about no war, no peace? What's
war,
that,
no
Mr.
peace.
Trotsky, sir? It's simple. No war means we'll stop fighting the Germans, but no peace means we won't sign the peace treaty either. Then, when the Germans say we've just stopped fighting, they'll have to leave us alone or something. Trotsky, that's genius. I could kiss you. Do you want me to kiss you? Stop asking me that. Trotsky.
Another big gamble. I think Trotsky's reasoning was the Germans were being pressed pretty hard in the West. If the Russians weren't fighting, maybe the Germans would divert all their attention westward and leave the Russians alone. But that doesn't work out that way.
Trotsky's no war, no peace plan was a huge success. Oh, wait, no, just kidding. It went exactly as you'd imagine. When the Germans saw the Russians had stopped fighting, they slammed 700,000 troops deep into Russian territory with no resistance. Now, the new peace treaty offered by the Germans was way worse, with Russia losing a huge amount of territory, population, and resources. The Bolsheviks had no choice but to accept, and Russia was humiliated. With Petrograd now in an exposed position, Lenin moved the capital to Moscow, just in case. Things really weren't going well for Lenin, and many people were extremely unhappy with the Bolshevik government and its actions. Lenin, you've pissed off so many people that they've united against you. We're under attack. Relax, we always expected some counter-revolutionary pushback. I think we can handle a few angry monopoly men. But Lenin, it's not just the monopoly men. Okay, who are we up against? Well, the liberals, the social revolutionaries, national separatists in Poland, Finland, and the Ukraine, independent warlords setting up chiefdoms, anarchist rebels, the Green Peasant armies, the Cossacks, the Caucasian states, the Baltic states, the British, the French, the Americans, and the Japanese. Oh, and a legion of Czechoslovakian soldiers seem to have taken over the Trans-Siberian Railway and stolen all the imperial gold reserves. What? How could this get any worse? Oh, and it says here your mother-in-law is coming to stay. No!
I mentioned this in the last video, but as far as I've ever been able to determine from what I've read, Lenin got along just fine with his mother-in-law, Elizaveta.
The anti-Bolshevik forces had united together to topple Lenin's government, and Russia descended into a full-blown civil war.
Yeah, so this is the Russian Civil War. The red here is the Bolsheviks, the Red Army. Then you have everybody else, which is the White Army. And something they don't talk about a lot in schools, or at least they didn't when I was in school, public school, I should say, high school and so on, is that this was very much an international event. France, England, United States all sent troops to support the White Army to stomp out the Bolsheviks and the Red Army. I believe the Americans sent around 10,000 troops straight from World War I. As soon as that ended, they shifted 10,000 troops over to participate in this Russian Civil War. And the United States was far from the only country that did this. As he mentioned, there were several others.
Now, the Russian Civil War was extremely intricate and would really need its own video, but essentially, the anti-Bolshevik white movement gained control of vast, underdeveloped areas, while the Bolshevik Reds controlled the industrial heartland, using this to their advantage, along with the surprising military genius of Trotsky and the shocking disorganization of the White Army. The fortified Red Army gradually came out on top. It was an absolutely brutal conflict, with both sides committing horrendous atrocities. To maintain order at home, the Bolsheviks began the Red Terror, and the secret police would execute tens of thousands of suspected traitors. No one was safe from the violence, not even Nicholas himself. You've probably been wondering what Nicholas has been up to this whole time. Well, after his abdication, he and his family were placed under house arrest. At first, they were allowed to live in their usual luxury, but after Lenin took over, their conditions worsened. The Bolsheviks were just holding on to Nick until they could work out what to do with him, but the Civil War complicated things. The last thing they wanted was for Nick to be freed by the White Armies. And so, to stop this from happening, Nicholas's Bolshevik guards decided to act.
So why would they be worried about that? Because that gives people a rallying point. You can turn Nicholas into a rallying point. Here is the Tsar. Let's rally behind him. Let's unite to bring back the Tsar. Would people go for that or not? That's another question. But this kind of thing is a common thing in monarchies. If you have a potential heir to the throne and you're trying to take over, you've got to get rid of all the legitimate heirs first, or other legitimate heirs if you are an illegitimate heir, but further down the line. Otherwise, people will rally behind the legitimate heirs. So that's always been a concern throughout history. And that's why so many kings, princes, cousins of kings and princes in some cases are assassinated or executed. It's to keep people from having a influential figure to rally behind.
It's not entirely certain whether Lenin ordered it, or if the guards were acting on their own volition. But on July 17th, 1918, with White Armies approaching, they woke Nicholas and his family in the middle of the night and brought them into the basement. There, a drunken squad of Bolsheviks murdered the entire family. Nicholas, the last Tsar, once one of the most powerful men alive, had met a brutal end. But after years of fighting and millions of deaths, Trotsky and his Red Army came out victorious. Wow, that was a close one. Okay, back to creating a communist utopia. How are we doing on that? Well, the Civil War helped create a massive famine and about 5 million people starved to death. There's massive inflation and the ruble is worthless. Hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of railway track have been destroyed. Disease and epidemics have killed 3 million. The population of Moscow and Petrograd has collapsed. Life expectancy has plummeted. Sailors in Kronstadt are rebelling. People are freezing to death in their own apartments and life has been reduced to a constant search for food and shelter. Whoa. Well, this just means I'll have to work twice as hard, day and night, to save the country. Nothing will stop me, short of a couple of sudden strokes. Get the dog.
Yeah, so Lenin does work hard. He does. He's trying to make things better in the country by his own definition. Let's be clear about that. His own definition of better. But, in the first video, they keep describing Lenin as uncompromising, unwilling to budge. But this period shows that that's not entirely true. When it comes to, like I said last video, political debate with other factions, he was relentless. But when it comes to setting policy and doing what he needs to do to make this revolution of his succeed, he's more willing to compromise if that compromise furthers what he's trying to achieve. For example, during this period in the early 20s, you have that famine that he talks about. And initially, Lenin tries to handle that himself, realizes that he's not able to, and accepts help from the international community. He allows the American Relief Association, led by Herbert Hoover, to come into the new Soviet Union and help alleviate some of this starvation, to help fight the famine. Now, he's concerned that the Americans will be using this to undermine his government, rightfully so, I might add, because that was one of the motivations for the United States to send in the ARA, was to show that capitalism worked better than communism, but he did allow it. Even though it was something he was dead set against, he relented because he did want to make things better for his people, just on his own terms. So he is a pretty complicated figure. He is obsessive compulsive, had a bit of a narcissistic streak, but his motivation seemed to be do the best I can for my country, even if I have to wipe out half of it to do it. He reminded me a little bit of Peacemaker in the Suicide Squad. I am going to fight for peace, even if I have to kill everybody to do it. It's kind of Lenin.
Doctor, one thing you have to keep in mind is that everything I've been talking about, the Civil War, the assassination attempt, and Lenin's struggle to maintain control at home, were all happening around the same time, and it must have been extremely stressful. Lenin began getting headaches, insomnia, and in 1922, he suffered 2 separate strokes. As the Soviet Union was officially declared under a strict one-party system, Lenin's health continued to decline, and his ability to lead the Communist Party went with it. Everybody assumed Trotsky would succeed him. He was a great speaker, he'd won the Civil War, and he had a dope-ass train. The last person anyone expected to take over was Stalin. Stalin wasn't a great intellectual.
Not the last person anyone expected to take over. Stalin, I think, absolutely expected to take over. He'd been planning for it for quite a while.
Intellectual like Lenin, or a charismatic war hero like Trotsky. He was, as one Menshevik described him, a gray blur. Someone who operated in the background. Someone who you might not even notice. But it was in the background that Stalin would rise to power. Here's how it happened. After the revolution, all the Bolsheviks hoped to get a cool job in the new government. What did you get? Commissar for War. Sweet! What'd you get? Secretary.
Very powerful position, though. Very influential.
Stalin was made general secretary for the Communist Party. It wasn't what he wanted, but Stalin quickly realized that even though it wasn't fancy, it was a powerful position. As secretary, he had the power to give people jobs within the party, so he would give jobs to all of his pals, who in turn would give him their support. The more pals he gave jobs, the more power he got. The more power he got, the more pals he got. Lenin may have been having wall-to-wall strokes, but he was still involved in the party, and he was taking notice. He wasn't a fan of Stalin abusing his position, or insulting his wife to her face. Lenin knew he couldn't let Stalin take over, but by this stage, he was just too sick to fight it. Hey man, tell whoever's in charge of giving people jobs not to let that jerk Stalin become the next leader. By the way, who did I put in charge of giving people jobs? That would be Stalin, sir. Well, déjà vu. Lenin's last wish was to not let Stalin take over, but by the time he died, Stalin was too powerful to remove. He had his remaining opponents arrested or killed. Trotsky was banished and fled to Europe. Eventually, he would be assassinated by Soviet spies in 1940.
Yeah, Trotsky is assassinated by a Soviet spy in Mexico. He's living in, I believe, in Mexico City. He's assassinated with an ice pick. Not the small, pointy thing, but the actual ice pick you use for ice climbing or for mining ice, that kind of thing.
Comrade Lenin has died. We should have a state funeral. No. Let's mummify him and put him on display so people can look at his dead body forever. That's gross. You're gross. Guards, kill him.
When I was in Moscow, I did visit Lenin's tomb. I did not go in. I suffer from a pretty severe fear of dead bodies. I couldn't bring myself to go in, but I did walk around the outside of the tomb. And not far away, there's a tomb, the Russian equivalent of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. I did visit that as well. But yeah, Lenin's still there to this day. Now, it was closed down for a while. I'm pretty sure they've reopened it, but I could be wrong about that.
Lenin had waited so long to take control in Russia, but he never got to see his communist utopia. His short time in charge was spent dealing with the destroyed Russian economy, World War I, and the Civil War. He was cruel and merciless. but he really did seem to believe communism would make Russia a better place.
Right.
Stalin, on the other hand, would take the Soviet Union down a different path. If you thought Lenin was a tyrant, well, you ain't seen nothing yet, girl. A secret police state, a rapidly militarizing superpower led by a paranoid man who deeply distrusted the West, would see the world come to the brink of nuclear annihilation.
Yep.
That's right, I'm talking about
The Cold War. We will get to that. What I'll probably
remember to click the link.
What I'll probably do is hit World War II first from Oversimplified. It's a natural progression of this. And then at the end of World War II, then we'll move into the Cold War. Just so you know, the next couple of videos will also be related to the Soviet Union, because the next 3 videos I'll be doing is Extra Histories, the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I hope to see you all for that. Till then, das vidanya. Goodbye.